The sound of the clock echoed through the quiet house, each tick a reminder of how still the world had become. Emily stood by the kitchen window, staring at the pale afternoon sky, her hands resting on the edge of the counter. The coffee in her cup had gone cold long ago, but she hadn't noticed. Her mind was far awake, caught somewhere between gratitude for what she had and the hollow ache of what she'd lost. It had been 3 years since her first husband passed away. For a long time, she had convinced herself she'd never open her heart again. But time, as it often does, softened the sharpest edges of grief. When she met David, everything changed. He was calm, patient, and had a warmth that reminded her life could still offer gentle surprises. They married quietly, in a small ceremony under a blooming cherry tree. Emily wore a light blue dress, not white, because it felt truer to her story, something not new, but reborn. She thought the hardest part was over. But it wasn't, because David had a son, Ryan. Ryan was 17, tall, quiet, and carried a kind of silence that seemed to fill every room he entered. He wasn't rude or distant. He was just somewhere else emotionally. Emily didn't blame him. Losing a mother at a young age and watching his father move on must have felt like losing pieces of the past all over again. Still, it hurt no matter how kind she tried to be offering him breakfast before school, asking about his classes, or leaving notes reminding him to take an umbrella on rainy days. His answers were short. Thanks. Yeah, I'm fine. Nothing more. At night, when David was working late shifts, Emily would sit in the living room and listen to the faint creaks of Ryan's footsteps upstairs. The house wasn't empty anymore, but it didn't feel like home either. She often wondered if Ryan saw her as an intruder. The following Saturday, the morning sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, filling the kitchen with a soft glow. Emily decided to bake something new, a simple batch of lemon cookies. Ryan's favorite, according to David. She wasn't sure if it would mean anything, but she hoped it might be a start. That as she measured the sugar and flour, her thoughts drifted. Maybe I'm trying too hard, she whispered under her breath. But the thought didn't stop her. Hope, even fragile hope, had always been part of who she was. When the cookies were done, the scent filled the entire house suite, warm and comforting. Emily smiled, placed a few on a plate, and climbed the stairs toward Ryan's room. His door was slightly ajar. Then from inside came the soft sound of music, its strummel almost melancholic. She hesitated, not wanting to intrude. But something about the stillness in that sound drew her closer. She knocked lightly. Ryan, I made something for you. There was a pause, then a faint, "Yeah, come in." Emily opened the door. Ryan sat at his desk, headphones pushed halfway off, surrounded by sheets of paper and pencils. His posture was slightly slouched, his face calm but distant. The sunlight from the window fell across the desk, revealing sketches, beautiful ones spread out in quiet disorder. Emily's breath caught. She'd expected to see random doodles or notes, but these were something else entirely. The drawings were tender, detailed portraits of a woman smiling softly. A woman with kind eyes and hair that seemed to dance in invisible wind. His mother. Emily's heart clenched. Ryan looked up, noticing her gaze. For a split second, there was fear in his eyes, like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. He quickly gathered the papers and set them aside. I was just drawing," Kay said quickly. Emily nodded, her voice gentle. "They're beautiful." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "It's nothing." She placed the plate of cookies on the edge of the desk. "I just thought you might want a snack." "I didn't mean to interrupt." Gave a quiet thanks, his voice almost a whisper. Emily smiled faintly and stepped back. Before she left, she glanced once more at the sketches, at the emotion behind every stroke. There was love, longing, and pain all at once. She recognized it because she had felt the same when she lost her first husband that night. As she sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the image of those drawings wouldn't leave her mind. The loneliness in Ryan's eyes was the same one she'd once seen in the mirror. It wasn't anger or rejection, it was sorrow, still unhealed. When David came home later, she asked softly, Does Ryan ever talk about his mom? David sighed, loosening his tie. Not much. He keeps most of it inside. Sometimes I think he feels guilty for moving on, like he's betraying her memory just by living. Emily listened quietly, her heart heavy. She didn't know how to reach Ryan yet, but she knew she had to try. Not for herself, but for him. Because somewhere inside that silence was a boy who had lost too much. Too soon. And maybe, just maybe, she could help him find his way back to light. The next morning, Emily walked past Ryan's door again. This time, it was closed. She didn't knock. Instead, she smiled faintly and left a small note taped to the door. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. Just know you're not alone. She didn't expect a reply. But that evening, when she came upstairs to turn off the lights, she noticed her note was gone in its place. A new one had appeared. It said, simply, thanks. The next few days passed quietly. But something had shifted subtle, almost invisible, like the faint scent of rain before a storm. Emily could sense it every time she walked through the house. Ryan wasn't avoiding her anymore. He wasn't exactly open, but the air between them felt softer. Like the silence had begun to breathe. One afternoon while David was at work, Emily sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The early autumn wind carried the smell of dry leaves. And the maple tree across the yard had just started to blush with orange and red. The season reminded her of change, the kind that hurt a little but promised beauty. To daughter thoughts drifted back to her own past. Before meeting David, she had spent years learning to live alone. After her husband, Mark, passed away, the world had turned gray. She remembered how quiet the house had been, how the ticking of the kitchen clock seemed louder than her own heartbeat. She had learned how to smile for others, but when she came home, the silence waited like a companion. She never invited, but couldn't send away. When David came into her life, she hadn't been looking for love. She just wanted peace, someone who understood the stillness she carried inside. He did. His calm nature drew her in, steady hands and kind words healing places. She didn't realize we're still wounded. But marriage didn't erase the past. It brought new layers to it. And Ryan was one of those layers, someone who still lived in the shadow of his mother's memory. Emily didn't resent that. In truth, she admired it. It showed how deeply he could feel. She wished she could tell him that, but some things had to be earned through time, not words. That Sunday morning, David suggested they all go out for breakfast together. It sounded simple, but Emily knew it was his quiet way of trying to bring the family closer. Ryan agreed, though his tone was cautious. The small diner they chose sat on the edge of town, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and maple syrup. The waitress greeted them with a smile, and they sat by the window, the sunlight glinting off the chrome napkin holder. Ryan ordered pancakes and orange juice, while Emily and David shared a pot of coffee for a while. They spoke about ordinary things, school schedules, the weather, how David's car needed a new battery. Then, out of nowhere, Ryan asked softly, "Do you ever still miss him?" Emily froze for a heartbeat. She realized he meant her late husband, Mark. She nodded slowly. "Yes, I do. Not every day, but sometimes. It's like missing a part of yourself that once fit perfectly." Ryan looked down at his plate. "Yeah, that's how I feel about Mom." The honesty in his voice was fragile, like glass that could shatter if handled too roughly. Emily wanted to reach across the table and hold his hand, but she didn't. Instead, she said, "It's okay to remember her. It's also okay to make new memories. You don't have to let go of one to have the other." For the first time, Ryan met her. Eyes really met them. There was no anger there, just quiet confusion and something deeper. David watched them both, smiling faintly, though his eyes glistened with emotion. That breakfast was simple, but it felt like the start of something. A tiny bridge being built, plank by plank. Over a long stretch of silence, later that week, Emily found Ryan in the backyard, sitting under the same maple tree she had admired days ago. A sketchbook rested on his knees, his pencil moving slowly across the page. She hesitated, then joined him, sitting a few feet away in the grass. "What are you drawing today?" she asked gently. He shrugged, not looking up. Nothing special, just the tree. She smiled. It's beautiful. You have a gift. He paused, then glanced at her. Mom used to draw too. She said it helped her think. Emily leaned back against the tree trunk. I understand that. Sometimes doing something quiet lets us hear what we really feel. There was a long pause, broken only by the sound of birds and the faint scratching of pencil on paper. Then Ryan spoke again, his tone softer. I didn't think my dad would ever be happy again. And when he met you, I didn't know how to feel about it. Emily's heart ached at the honesty in his voice. I understand, she said. Change can be hard, especially when it feels like it replaces something precious. But I don't want to replace her, Ryan. I just want to be someone who cares about you both. He didn't answer right away. But when he finally did, his voice was quiet, almost a whisper. I think she'd be okay with that. Emily blinked back sudden tears. The first snow of the season arrived quietly that morning. The sky was pale, the kind of soft white that made everything seem still and sacred. Emily stood by the kitchen window, holding her coffee. Watching the flakes swirl like little memories in the air, she smiled faintly. Winter had always made her nostalgic. It reminded her of quiet evenings, handwritten letters, and the warmth of fireplaces shared between people who didn't need words to understand one another. David had left early for work. Ryan was home as school had canceled classes due to the snowstorm. The house was hushed, except for the occasional creak of wood as it settled against the cold dot. Emily turned on some gentle music and began dusting the bookshelves. She found herself pausing every now and then to glance at the family photographs, one of her and David on their wedding day, another of Ryan and his father fishing years ago, when she picked up a frame that had fallen sideways. She noticed something behind it, a folded piece of paper tucked between the books. She unfolded it carefully. It was one of Ryan's sketches. This one, though, was different. It wasn't of his mother or the maple tree. It was of the living room sunlight streaming through the window. Her sitting on the couch with a book in her hands, a calm expression on her face. The drawing was delicate, full of quiet admiration, as if he had been trying to capture not her image, but her peace. Emily's heart fluttered, not because it was romantic, no. It wasn't that at all, but because it showed trust. For the first time, Ryan had seen her not as a stranger, but as part of his world. Later that afternoon, the power went out. The snow had grown heavier, and the house dimmed under the cloudy sky. Emily lit a few candles and wrapped herself in a blanket near the fireplace. Moments later, Ryan came downstairs holding his phone flashlight. The power's out, he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I noticed, Emily replied with a chuckle. Looks like we're going old-fashioned for a while. He sat across from her, near the fire. The warm glow reflected on his face, and for a long while. They said nothing, just listened to the crackling of wood. I used to hate snow days, Ryan said suddenly. When Mom was sick, winter felt endless. Every time it snowed, it meant she couldn't go outside. Emily's smile faded softly. That must have been hard. He nodded. It was, but now I don't know. I kind of like it again. It feels quiet, peaceful. She studied his expression, the way his eyes softened when he spoke about the past, the maturity in his words. He wasn't a child anymore. He was growing into someone thoughtful, someone who carried emotion with grace. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks upward. Emily reached for another log and added it carefully. You know, she said, when I was your age, I used to think quiet moments like this were boring. Now I realize they're the ones that stay with you. Ryan smiled faintly. You sound like my dad. She laughed softly. That's probably the nicest thing you've said to me all month, he grinned. The tension between them, the years of distance, seemed to melt a little, replaced by the gentle warmth of shared understanding. Hours passed and the storm grew stronger outside. The world beyond their windows was completely white now, silent and endless dot. Emily got up to check on the kitchen pipes, worried they might freeze. As she passed by the hallway, she noticed something new, one of Ryan's canvases leaning against the wall. It wasn't finished yet, but it caught her eye. It showed two figures sitting beneath the maple tree, the same one from the yard but now. Snow surrounded them instead of sunlight. The details were rough, incomplete, but it was unmistakably them. She ran her fingers lightly across the edge of the canvas. There was something poetic about it, a continuation of the story they'd begun months ago. She turned when she heard footsteps behind her. Ryan stood there, slightly embarrassed. "I was going to move that," he said. "It's beautiful," Emily said sincerely. "I didn't mean to look without asking." He shrugged. "It's fine. I was going to show it to you anyway. I just wasn't finished." Emily smiled softly. Art doesn't always need to be finished to say something. For a long moment, neither spoke. The faint flicker of candlelight played across their faces. And Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a deep, wordless connection. Not romantic, not maternal exactly, but something in between. Something human. It was the kind of understanding that only comes when two souls, both carrying different kinds of loss, recognize themselves in each other. When the lights finally came back on hours later, the house glowed again with gentle warmth. Ryan stood by the window, watching the snow fall more softly now. Emily joined him. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" "Ah," he nodded. "Yeah, I think I'll paint it tomorrow. Another tree," she teased. He shook his head with a small laugh. "No, this time maybe just the snow. It reminds me that things can start over." Emily looked at him quietly, her heart full. "That's a good thought, Ryan." He turned to her, his voice low but certain. "Thanks for not giving up on me." She smiled, her eyes misty. "Never." That night, as she lay in bed beside David, she replayed the evening in her mind, the firelight, the conversation, the unfinished painting. It wasn't a dramatic twist of fate, not some grand revelation, but sometimes the smallest things, a snowstorm, a sketch, a shared silence could change everything. For the first time, Emily felt that their home wasn't divided by memory anymore. It was growing into something whole, something fragile but real. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and steady, as if the world itself was blessing this quiet turning point. And though neither of them said it aloud, both Emily and Ryan knew something beautiful had begun to heal. The snow melted slowly over the following weeks, leaving behind puddles that glimmered in the sunlight. The days grew longer, and the air began to smell of earth and rain. That in-between season when winter hasn't quite left and spring hasn't yet arrived. For Emily, those weeks felt quieter, but not in a lonely way. Something in the house had changed since that snowstorm, a stillness that wasn't empty, but peaceful. Ryan still spent much of his time sketching, but he no longer shut his door completely. Sometimes she'd pass by and find it slightly open, music playing low, pencil scratching faintly against paper. It was progress, not loud, not dramatic, but gentle and real. One afternoon, while David was away for a work trip, Emily decided to reorganize the attic. The space hadn't been touched in months. Dust coated the boxes, and the air smelled of cedar and old paper. She opened one labeled Family Memories, expecting to find holiday decorations or old photo albums. Inside, she discovered something unexpected, a worn leather folder filled with drawings. At first, she assumed they were Ryan's, but when she looked closer, her breath caught. The signature on the bottom corner of each page was delicate, familiar. Lisa Harper, Ryan's mother, Emily, sat down slowly, turning through the sketches. They were breathtaking, soft pencil portraits of places, faces, and one, most beautifully, of a small boy standing under a tree. His hand lifted toward the light. Ryan, her throat tightened. She could feel the love in every line, the way Lisa had captured her son's spirit. Even then, there was no sadness in the drawings, only devotion, warmth, and hope. As she turned the last page, a folded note slipped out. It was short, a message written in neat handwriting to my Ryan. "Never stop seeing beauty, even when it hurts to look. Love will find you again." Emily's eyes blurred. She held the note against her chest for a moment, feeling both the ache and comfort of another woman's love. She knew she had to show it to him. That evening, Ryan came home from the art studio where he'd been taking weekend classes. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, his hands slightly smudged with charcoal. Emily met him in the kitchen, her voice soft. "I found something today. I think it belongs to you." He looked at her curiously as she handed him the leather folder. When he saw the handwriting, his eyes widened. "Mom's," he whispered, almost afraid to touch it. He sat at the table, opening it slowly, reverently. The first drawing made him smile. The second made him tear up. When he reached the last page and found the note, he froze. Emily stayed quiet, letting him absorb it. After a long silence, Ryan spoke. "She used to draw while I did my homework. She'd say it helped her remember what happiness looked like." He traced the edge of the paper with trembling fingers. "I forgot about these." Emily swallowed, her voice low. "She wanted you to keep seeing beauty. And you have. Every time you draw, Ryan, you honor her." He looked up at her, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sometimes I think she'd be disappointed that I couldn't move on." "She wouldn't," Emily said gently. "She'd be proud that you're still creating, still feeling, still trying. That's all she ever wanted for you." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of everything they couldn't quite say. Two people connected by loss, standing quietly in understanding. Later that night, Emily couldn't sleep. She walked downstairs, wrapped in a soft blanket, and found Ryan sitting by the fireplace again. The sketchbook lay open on his lap, the pages fluttering slightly in the draft. He looked up when she entered. "Couldn't sleep either." "Not really," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "It's one of those nights that feels like a memory." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I was just thinking about her. And about now, about how things change, but not completely." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "It's strange. I thought after Shiwa." The first signs of spring came quietly. The air turned softer. The branches outside Emily's kitchen window were tipped with pale green. And the sound of birds returned to the mornings. Life, in its quiet persistence, was finding its way back. For Ryan, those days felt different, not lighter, but more real. His art had taken on a new rhythm. Instead of sketching shadows, he began to draw moments, his father fixing a clock in the study, Emily pouring tea with her gentle focus, even the sunlight that fell through the window onto the dining table. He didn't show these to anyone at first. They felt private, almost sacred. But inside, something was shifting. A truth he'd buried for months was beginning to surface. Not through words, but through every line of charcoal and stroke of color one Sunday afternoon. The family gathered for lunch. David was cheerful, recounting stories from work, while Emily laughed softly, her eyes bright with warmth. Ryan mostly listened, his heart caught somewhere between gratitude and ache. He had grown used to this peace, the laughter, the comfort, the sense of belonging that had returned to the house. But beneath it all lay something unsaid, a truth that pressed against his chest every time. Emily smiled at him with quiet kindness. After lunch, David received a call from his office and had to leave for a few hours. Emily began clearing the table while Ryan stayed behind, gathering plates into a neat stack. "I'll help," he said. She glanced up, smiling. "You've been helping a lot lately." "Feels right," he replied. "It's good to take care of things that matter." Something in his tone made her pause. Their eyes met for a moment, long enough for both to sense the undercurrent. Neither had spoken aloud. She looked away first, continuing to rinse the dishes. The air between them was calm but alive. Words seemed to hover. Waiting. Later that afternoon, Emily went to the small garden at the back of the house. She had planted tulip bulbs months ago, and now small green shoots had begun to appear. She knelt to brush the soil away from one, smiling to herself. She didn't hear Ryan at first, but when she turned, he was standing at the fence, sketchbook in hand. "I wanted to draw this," he said. "You always said patience brings beauty." She laughed softly. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything," he said simply. There was a pause, not awkward, just deep. The kind of silence that means more than words. He stepped closer, holding out the sketchbook. I finished something. I wasn't sure if I should show you, but I think I need to. Emily stood and took the book carefully, her fingers brushing his. Inside was a drawing of her, not perfect, but full of feeling. She was sitting at the kitchen window, looking out into the light, her face thoughtful and calm, her breath caught. "Ryan, this is beautiful." He looked at her, and for the first time there was no hesitation in his eyes. "It's how I see you," he said quietly. "You don't even realize how much light you bring to this house." To me, Emily's heart trembled. The sincerity in his voice wasn't romantic. Not in the way the world might mistake, but deeply emotional. He wasn't speaking of love born from attraction, but from understanding, gratitude, and connection. Still, it was an intense truth, the kind that could easily be misunderstood. She took a breath, steadying herself. "Ryan," she said softly, "I never wanted to replace anyone. Your mother. She'll always be part of you." He nodded quickly. "I know. You haven't replaced her. You've reminded me what it feels like to care again." His voice wavered. "I didn't think I could feel that kind of warmth anymore. Not after losing her. But you," he stopped, swallowing hard. "You made me believe that life can still be kind." For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. His honesty was raw, brave. She could see that this confession wasn't about romantic love, it was about trust. About his heart finally opening after years of silence. She reached out and took his hand gently. "Ryan," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "what you're feeling isn't wrong. It's what healing feels like. You've carried so much pain, and now you're learning to let it go. That's love too, just in another form." He blinked, tears gathering in his eyes. "I just didn't want you to think I was crossing a line. You've done so much for me. I didn't want this to feel wrong." Emily shook her head. "Nothing about this is wrong. You've given me something precious, too. You've reminded me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice and care and quiet moments like this." She smiled gently. "You don't have to hide how you feel. I see it. I understand it. And I'm grateful for it." Ryan exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to release everything he'd been holding inside. The garden around them was still. A soft breeze stirred the branches, and for the first time in a long while, the heaviness between them lifted. Emily looked back down at the drawing, her eyes glistening. "You should keep this," she said. "It's your truth. And one day, when you look back, you'll see how far you've come." He smiled faintly, brushing his sleeve across his eyes. "Maybe, but it feels like yours too." She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then let's say it belongs to both of us, a reminder of how healing can look when we let it." He nodded, his expression peaceful. That evening, Emily found herself sitting by the window, watching the sky turn gold and pink. She thought of Ryan's words, "You made me believe that life can still be kind." Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind that come when something long hidden finally sees the light. Upstairs, she could hear faint pencil strokes again. The sound was steady, certain, and she smiled, knowing this was the turning point, not an ending. But the moment both their hearts finally began to move forward, the weeks that followed the quiet conversation in the garden seemed softer somehow. The tension that once lingered in the house had melted into something peaceful, unspoken but present, a calm understanding that words no longer needed to define. Ryan spent more time in his studio, not hiding as before, but living in his art. His drawings began to change. Light replaced shadow. Movement replaced stillness. He started painting scenes from his walks with Emily, the garden in the late afternoon light, and even small moments, a hand resting on a teacup, sunlight spilling across a page. The warmth of everyday life returning, Emily noticed. And though she said little, she smiled more often. One morning, David stood in the doorway of Ryan's art room, his expression one of quiet surprise. "You've been busy," he said, scanning the sketches that filled the walls. Ryan looked up from his easel, a bit shy. "Yeah, It feels different now. I guess I've finally had something to say. David stepped closer, pausing at a drawing of Emily tending the garden. This one's beautiful, he said. You captured her perfectly. Ryan nodded. She's been the reason I can draw again. She reminded me what home feels like. David turned to his son, his eyes soft. You have no idea how much that means to hear. She was worried for a long time, thought you'd never let her in. Ryan hesitated, then spoke carefully. She never pushed. She just stayed. That made all the difference. David smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. I'm proud of you, son. You've grown more than I could have hoped for. Ryan's chest tightened with quiet emotion. Thanks, Dad. It was a moment of healing, not dramatic or loud, but real. The kind that stays. That evening, Emily found a small envelope on her kitchen counter. Her name was written on it in Ryan's familiar handwriting. She opened it and found a folded letter inside, written in careful lines. Emily, I don't think I ever thanked you properly for what you've done for me. You didn't just come into Dad's life, you changed mine. I used to think losing Mom meant losing the part of me that could care again. But you showed me that caring doesn't replace anyone. It just grows around the memories we keep. I hope I've made you proud. Ryan She held the letter to her chest, her eyes blurring with tears. It was simple, but it meant more than words could hold. When Ryan came downstairs a few minutes later, he was waiting by the window. Ryan, she said softly, holding up the letter. This means the world to me. He looked unsure. I wasn't sure if I should give it to you. I'm glad you did. She smiled warmly. You've made me proud in ways you don't even see. You've learned to open your heart again. That's the hardest thing anyone can do. He smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. You helped me do that. And you reminded me that love doesn't always have to look the same to be real, she replied. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's patient. But it's always worth it. The words hung between them, not heavy but full of peace. A month later, spring came in full bloom. The tulips in the garden finally opened, soft pinks and yellows swaying gently in the wind. Emily called from the porch, Ryan, they're blooming. He came out, wiping paint from his hands, and smiled at the sight. They're perfect. David joined them, wrapping an arm around Emily's shoulder. You two did a good job with this garden, Emily laughed. Ryan did most of the work. I just gave a few tips. Ryan shook his head. We both did. You taught me how to wait for things to grow. They stood together, looking at the small patch of color before them. It wasn't just a garden. It was a symbol of everything they had been through. Grief, distance, healing, and love, all now rooted in new soil. That evening, Emily suggested hosting a small art showing at the community center for Ryan. You should share your work, she said. It's time. He hesitated, but the encouragement in her voice made him nod. 2 weeks later, people gathered at